There is a version of you that is still waiting for permission that is never going to come. Read that again, because it might be the most important sentence anyone says to you this year. You have been standing at the edge of your own life, checking over your shoulder, hoping someone, a parent, a boss, a stranger with more followers than you, a version of society that doesn't even have a face, will finally nod and say, yes, now you may begin. And here's the truth that is going to sting before it sets you free. That nod is never coming. Nobody is going to hand you the microphone. Nobody is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, you're ready. You were born ready. And every day you've spent waiting for someone else's approval has been a day quietly stolen from the only life you're going to get. In 26, that ends. Not because the calendar flipped, not because of some magic in numbers. It ends because you are going to decide right here, right now, while these words are still landing on you, that you owe yourself something you have been putting off for far too long. You owe yourself the truth. You owe yourself the attempt. You owe yourself the version of you that you keep glimpsing in quiet moments, in the shower, in the car, at 3 a.m. when the world is asleep and your soul finally speaks honestly. And then you shove that voice back down because it's inconvenient, because it's scary, because admitting what you actually want means you might have to change. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it, not just let it pass by like background noise. If nothing changes, if you keep doing exactly what you're doing, thinking exactly what you're thinking, settling for exactly what you're settling for, where are you in 5 years? Not vague, specifically. Picture the apartment, picture the job, picture the face in the mirror at 40, at 50, at 60, looking back at a life that was survived instead of living. Feel that. Sit in that feeling for one more second, because that discomfort you feel right now, that tightening in your chest, that is not your enemy. That is the most honest conversation your soul has had with you in years. That feeling has been trying to reach you through every distraction you've used to drown it out, through every scroll, every binge, every I'll start Monday, every excuse dressed up as wisdom. It has been knocking. Tonight, it's not knocking anymore. It's kicking the door down. Here's the story nobody tells you when you're growing up chasing gold stars and approval. The people who actually built something, who actually became someone, they didn't get there by waiting for a permission slip. Somewhere along their road, there was a moment, usually a quiet one, usually one nobody else even noticed, where they stopped asking, is this okay? And started simply moving. Not reckless, not without thought, but without needing anyone else to co-sign their own existence. Think about the last time you saw someone truly captivating, on a stage, in a boardroom, on a screen, in a conversation that left you breathless. What made them magnetic wasn't perfection. It wasn't that they had no flaws. It was that they weren't performing permission. They weren't leaking little apologies out of every sentence, every choice, every glance. They had decided somewhere back down the line that their voice deserved to take up space in this world, and they stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. That decision, that exact decision, is available to you right now. It is not reserved for the lucky, the talented, the chosen few who got some head start you didn't. It is a decision, and decisions can be made in a single breath. I want you to notice something about the way you've been living. And I say this with love, not judgment, because I have lived in it too. We spend so much of our lives auditioning for roles that were never meant for us, trying to become someone else's version of successful, someone else's version of enough, someone else's idea of what a good life looks like, that we forget to ask the one question that actually matters. What do you want? Not what looks impressive on a profile, not what would make your family stop worrying, not what would prove a point to someone who probably isn't even thinking about you as much as you think they are. What do you actually want when nobody is watching, when there's no reward for the right answer, when it's just you and the truth in a quiet room? That question terrifies most people, and that's exactly why most people never ask it. It's easier to keep performing a life than to sit with the discomfort of designing one. But you didn't come this far. You didn't survive everything you've already survived just to keep handing your one wild, unrepeatable life over to a committee of people who will forget your name the moment you stop being useful to them. This is the year you take it back, not next year, not when things calm down, because things are never going to calm down. That's a myth you tell yourself to justify staying comfortable. This year, 26 is not a fresh start handed to you by the universe. It is a fresh start you are going to claim with your bare hands out of the wreckage of every excuse you've been recycling since you were old enough to know better. And by the time this message is done, by the time you've sat with every word I'm about to say, you are going to understand something that changes the entire shape of how you move through the rest of your days. You don't owe anyone else your dreams. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them the smaller, safer, quieter version of yourself that makes everybody else feel comfortable while you slowly disappear inside your own life. The only thing you owe, the only debt that has been quietly accruing interest while you looked away, is the one you owe to you. So, let's talk about where this actually starts, because inspiration without direction is just noise. And you didn't come here for noise. You came here because some parts of you are done waiting. It starts with a decision that most people are terrified to make, and it is this. You stop asking for permission to exist as your fullest self. Think about it. How much of your life has quietly been shaped by an invisible request for approval? You ask permission with your tone of voice when you speak up in a meeting, softening every opinion until it barely counts as one. You ask permission with your body language when you shrink in rooms full of people who are frankly no more qualified than you are to take up space. You ask permission with your choices, running every dream past a panel of people who never had the courage to chase their own, and then wondering why their doubt somehow becomes your ceiling. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The moment you stop needing someone else's nod to move forward is the moment you actually start living instead of auditioning for a life you were already qualified to have. This isn't about arrogance. It isn't about bulldozing other people or pretending you have nothing left to learn. It is about recognizing that somewhere between childhood and now, you were taught to wait for a green light that was never going to come from outside of you because the green light was installed in you the entire time. You just forgot where the switch was. And here's what happens the moment you flip it. You get thrown almost immediately into a kind of isolation you weren't expecting. Nobody warned you about this part. The moment you stop performing approval and start moving on your own authority, the applause gets quieter, not louder, at least at first. The soft landings disappear. The attaboys, the reassurance, the constant validation that used to cushion every step, they thin out because you're no longer doing the thing that earns easy applause, which is playing it safe inside everyone else's expectations. Suddenly it's just you and the work and the decision. And no one is going to tell you whether you're doing it right. That is terrifying. It is also the exact moment where real growth becomes possible, because comfort and growth have never once lived in the same room. That isolation you feel when you finally start choosing yourself is not punishment. It is an initiation. It is the universe testing whether you actually meant it or whether you were just talking about a good game to sound inspired for 5 minutes before crawling back to the safety of everyone else's opinions. Most people don't make it past this part. They flip the switch, feel the silence, mistake the silence for failure, and quietly flip it back off, telling themselves a story about how it wasn't the right time, or maybe I'm just not built for that. You are not going to do that. Not this year, because you are going to understand going forward that the silence is not the absence of progress. It is the sound of you finally doing something that matters enough to require your full self instead of your performed self. Anything worth building is going to ask you to sit in that silence longer than feels comfortable. The question is whether you're going to trust yourself enough to stay in the room with it, or whether you're going to bolt for the exit. The second thing stops feeling easy. Now let's talk about a trap that catches even the most driven, hardworking people among us. Because you might be sitting there thinking, I'm not lazy, I'm not scared, I put in the work. Good, that matters. But here's the trap. So many of us spend our first real stretch of effort trying to be impressive instead of trying to be honest. And those are not the same thing, even though they can look identical from a distance. You sit down to build something, a business, a body, a relationship, a piece of art, a version of your life. And the first instinct is to make it look good. It sounds good, perform good. You reach for the phrases that sound powerful instead of the ones that are true. You polish the surface because the surface is what gets noticed first. And somewhere along the way, you convince yourself that impressive is the goal. It isn't. Impressive is what happens by accident when you finally get honest enough that people can't look away. But if you chase impressive directly, you end up producing something that shines on the outside and rings hollow underneath. Because people, even if they can't articulate why, can always feel the difference between something built to look good and something built to be true. There is a particular kind of humbling that has to happen before real work begins, and it usually shows up as embarrassment. You look back at your early attempts, your first drafts, your first pitches, your first version of the plan, and you'll cringe because you'll realize you were polishing the outside of the car while the engine sat untouched underneath. That's not a failure. That's the tuition you pay for honesty. Everyone who has ever built something real has a version of that same story, a season where they mistook decoration for substance. And the only way through it is to keep going until the gap between impressive and honest collapses. Until you finally write, speak, build, and live in a way that doesn't need the varnish because the truth underneath is strong enough to stand on its own. That's the shift you're being asked to make this year. Stop polishing what you haven't actually built yet. Go build the engine first. The shine will take care of itself. Now here's something almost nobody says out loud, and I want you to really absorb it because it might rearrange something inside of you. You are allowed to be full of yourself, not arrogant, not cruel, not blind to your flaws, but full. Think about how strange it is that we've built an entire culture around teaching people to be endlessly generous with grace toward everyone except themselves. You will comfort a friend who fails at something with the gentlest words you own. You will tell them it's okay that they tried their best, that one setback doesn't define them. And then you turn that same lens on yourself and somehow the volume changes completely. Suddenly you are your own harshest critic, kicking yourself out the door with words you would never let anyone say to someone you love. Why is that? Why do we reserve our cruelest voice for the one person we spend every single day of our lives with? This year, that pattern breaks. You are going to learn to look yourself in the mirror after a win and actually say out loud if you have to, "Good job, that's what you wanted and you got it," instead of immediately hunting for the flaw. Yeah, but. The reason it doesn't really count. And you are going to learn to look yourself in the mirror after a loss and hold both truths at once. You own the mistake, you make the amends, and then you move on, instead of dragging guilt behind you like a chain for the next 6 months. Guilt and regret, left unchecked, will quietly kill more dreams than any external failure ever could. They don't announce themselves as killers. They dress up as humility, as caution, as just being realistic. And meanwhile, they're slowly convincing you that you don't deserve the thing you actually want. Here's what I need you to understand about mistakes, because this single reframe alone can change how the rest of this year goes for you. You are not required to be perfect to be worthy of the life you're chasing. You are required to be honest about what went wrong, willing to repair what you can, and disciplined enough to actually move forward instead of setting up permanent residence in regret. Life has to be lived forward, but it only ever makes sense looking backward. And that means you are never going to get the full picture in real time. You are never going to have complete certainty before you act. The people who are waiting for certainty before they move are going to be waiting for the rest of their lives. Because certainty is not something life hands out in advance. It's something you earn in hindsight after you've already had the courage to move without it. There's a particular kind of magic that happens when you stop trying to figure out exactly who you are and instead start eliminating who you are clearly not. This sounds like a small distinction, but it will save you years. So many people torture themselves trying to answer the enormous vague question of, who am I really? As if identity is some hidden treasure buried at the bottom of a well that you have to dig for your whole life. But it is so much simpler and so much more honest to instead pay attention to what drains you, what feels false, what makes your stomach twist with a quiet, no, not that, and start subtracting. Every time you eliminate something that clearly isn't you, you get a little closer to what is, almost by simple math. You don't need the whole map before you take the first step. You just need to know in this moment whether you're pressing the accelerator towards something that lights you up or keeping your foot on the brake out of fear disguised as prudence. Most people are not lacking direction nearly as much as they are lacking the courage to take their foot off that brake. And now, because this next part matters more than almost anything else I'll say to you in this message, let's talk about hard seasons. Because 26 is not going to be an unbroken streak of victories. And anyone who promises you that is selling you something. There will be stretches where the ground is given out beneath you, where the plan falls apart, where you do everything right and still watch it collapse anyway. Here's the thing nobody tells you about those seasons. The instinct to grind harder, to white-knuckle your way through every hard moment through sheer force is not always the answer. Sometimes what a hard season is actually asking of you is not more muscle, but more perspective. Sometimes you need to step back, laugh at the absurdity of it, take a breath, and remember that not every storm is meant to be fought head on. Some storms are meant to be danced through. There is a version of resilience that looks like gritted teeth and clenched fists. And there is another version that looks like loosening your grip enough to see the situation clearly instead of white-knuckling your way into more exhaustion. Both have their place. Learning which one a moment calls for is one of the quiet skills that separates people who burn out from people who last. And here's the deeper secret buried inside every hard season you'll face this year. Almost nothing that feels devastating in the moment stays devastating once enough time has passed for you to see the whole shape of it. The doors that slam shut on you are more often than you'd believe while you're standing in front of them, quietly redirecting you toward doors you didn't even know existed. That doesn't mean you have to pretend the pain isn't real while you're in it. It is real. You're allowed to feel it fully. The sadness, the anger, the sleepless nights where your mind keeps trying to work out the riddle of, why did this happen to me? That's not weakness. That's being human. And anyone who tells you to just skip past your pain into forced positivity is asking you to lie to yourself, which never actually works. It just delays the reckoning. But somewhere inside that honest grief, you can also hold a second truth at the very same time. This isn't the end of your story, even when it feels like it. It's simply a chapter you can't read at the end of yet, because life only ever makes sense in reverse. There is discipline hiding inside every good season too, and it's one most people completely ignore because it feels unnecessary when things are going well. When life is good, when you're on a roll, when the momentum is finally with you, that is exactly the moment to slow down and study why. What were you doing right before things started clicking? What habits were quiet in place? Did you sleep well? Were you moving your body? Were you actually present with the people you love, or performing presence while your mind stayed somewhere else? Were you appreciating what you had instead of already anxious about what could take it away? Most people never bottle the science of their good seasons, which means when things get hard again, they have no map back. You are going to be different. You are going to notice, name, and protect the habits that build your good seasons, so that when the next hard stretch inevitably arrives, because it will, you already know the way back to solid ground. This is what you owe yourself in 26. Not perfection, not certainty, not the approval of every person you've spent your whole life trying to please. You owe yourself honesty over decoration. You owe yourself the discomfort of moving without permission instead of the false comfort of waiting for a green light that isn't coming. You owe yourself grace after failure and real credit after success, instead of the lopsided cruelty most of us practice on ourselves daily. You owe yourself the willingness to eliminate what isn't you, even before you fully know what is. And you owe yourself the patience to trust that the hard seasons are not the whole story, only a chapter, one that will make sense once you're standing far enough down the road to look back and see how every single piece connected. We are just getting started. Everything you've read so far is the foundation, the truth you had to hear before anything else could be built on top of it. But foundations aren't the house. There is more waiting. The part where we talk about exactly how you turn this decision into daily action, how you build the kind of unshakable self-trust that doesn't collapse the first time life gets hard, and how you make 26 the year this stops being a speech you watched and starts being the life you actually live. Stay with me. The next part is where everything changes. All right, enough sitting with the truth. Truth without action is just a nice feeling that evaporates by morning. You know what you owe yourself now. You felt it. So let's stop talking about the mountain and start talking about your hands, your feet, and your breath at 5 a.m. when the alarm goes off and every cell in your body is negotiating with you to go back to sleep. This is where it gets real. This is where most people quietly exit the theater. Because it's one thing to nod along to inspiration in a dark room. It's another thing entirely to get up tomorrow and do something about it when nobody's watching and nothing's guaranteed. Here's what nobody puts in the highlight reel. The grind doesn't look like a montage. It doesn't have a soundtrack. It looks like sitting in a chair you don't want to be sitting in, doing a rep you don't want to do, sending an email you're terrified will get ignored, showing up to a version of yourself that isn't cheering you on yet, because it hasn't seen the results yet either. It looks like Tuesday. Not the big launch, not the dramatic turning point, not the moment they'll put in the documentary. Tuesday. Just an ordinary, forgettable Tuesday where you do the work anyway, with no applause, no proof it's working, nothing but your own word to yourself that you'd show up. That is the whole game. Anyone who tells you it's more complicated than that is trying to sell you a shortcut that doesn't exist. So, let's build the machinery. Not motivation. Motivation is a match. It flares up bright and burns out fast. And if you're relying on it to get you through 26, you are going to be stranded by February. What you need instead is a system, a structure, so solid that on the days you feel nothing, no fire, no spark, no reason, you still move because the structure moves you. Discipline isn't the absence of feeling like quitting. Discipline is doing it anyway, while every fiber of you is voting to stop. Anybody can act on a good day. The entire competition, the entire separation between the people who make it and the people who talk about making it happens on the bad days. On the days it's raining, you're exhausted, nobody believes in you, and the scoreboard says you're losing. That's the day that decides everything, not the good days. The good days take care of themselves. I want you to picture the specific texture of hard work, because vague inspiration doesn't build anything. Picture the hours that don't get counted, the ones before the sun's even considering coming up, when the house is silent and it's just you and the work and the temptation to go back to bed disguised as reasonable rest. Picture the version of you standing in the mirror at midnight, body aching, mind foggy, staring down one more rep, one more page, one more cold call, one more attempt at the thing that hasn't worked yet. And doing it anyway, not because you feel like a warrior in that moment, but because you made a promise to a version of yourself who isn't in the room to hold you accountable anymore, except you. Picture the sting of rejection landing again, the door closing, the deal falling through, the audition ending in silence. And instead of letting it define the whole story, treating it as data, just data. One more piece of information about what doesn't work yet filed away so you can adjust and go again tomorrow with slightly better aim. This is where the difference between wanting and building finally splits apart. Wanting is passive. Wanting sits on the couch and hopes the universe notices how badly you want it and rewards the wanting itself. Building is violent, in the best sense of that word. It takes something and forces it into existence through sheer repeated contact between your will and the resistance in front of you. Nothing worth having arrived because you wanted it hard enough. It arrives because you met the resistance, day after day, blow after blowing, and simply refused to be the one who stopped first. Resistance isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. Resistance is the toll booth on the right path. Anyone who tells you the right path feels easy has never actually walked one. Let's talk about the specific kind of pain that separates the people who finish from the people who fold, because there are two very different kinds of pain, and confusing them will cost you everything. There's the pain of discipline, the burn in the legs on the last set, the exhaustion after the 10th rewrite, the awkward silence after you finally say the hard thing out loud. That pain is temporary and it's building something. And then there's the pain of regret, the slow, corrosive ache of knowing you had it in you and you didn't try. The ache that doesn't peak and fade like disciplined pain does, but instead sits in your chest for years, sometimes decades, quietly getting heavier. Discipline pain has an expiration date. Regret's pain does not. Every single time you're standing at the fork between the two, and you will stand at that fork more times this year than you can count. Ask yourself which pain you're actually choosing, because you are always choosing one or the other. There is no version of this life where you choose either. Here's a piece of strategy most people skip because it isn't flashy enough to post about. You do not need a perfect plan. You need the next step. The people who never start are usually the ones who are waiting for the entire staircase to be visible before they put a foot on the first stair. That staircase is never going to fully reveal itself. You will only ever be able to see a few steps ahead, sometimes just one, sometimes barely. And that's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. Take the steps you can see. Take it fully, take it seriously, and take it like it's the only step that exists, because right now it is. The next one will reveal itself the moment your foot lands. This is how every person who has ever built something real actually did it, whether they admit it publicly or not. Not with a flawless master plan unrolled from day one, but with a series of next steps taken with total commitment, one after another, long after the point where it would have been easier to stop and wait for more certainty. And when you take that step, take it without apologizing for it. This is something you have to build into your bones this year, because the world will constantly try to make you smaller, softer, more agreeable, more willing to shrink your ambition down to a size that doesn't threaten anyone's comfort. There is a specific kind of energy that comes from someone who has decided they are not asking permission anymore, who is not seeking a stamp of approval before they act, who is simply moving with the full weight of their conviction behind them. You've felt that energy in a room before. It's magnetic. And it's not because that person is louder or more talented than everyone else. It's because they've stopped leaking apology into every choice they make. Every sorry to bother you, every this might be a dumb idea, but every flinch before speaking a truth. Strip those out of your vocabulary this year. Not because you stop being kind. You can be kind and unshakable at the same time. Those are not opposites. But stop performing smallness as a way of making other people comfortable with your growth. Your growth was never going to be comfortable for everyone. Let it be uncomfortable. Keep moving anyway. Now, the grind is going to test you in a very specific way. And I need you to prepare for it before it happens, because it will happen, probably sooner than you think. There is going to be a stretch, maybe weeks, maybe months, where you are doing everything right and seeing absolutely nothing to show for it. No growth, no traction, no proof, just effort disappearing into what feels like a void. This is the single most dangerous stretch of the entire journey, because it's precisely where almost everyone quits right before the compounding actually becomes visible. Growth in real life doesn't move in a smooth, satisfying diagonal line the way it does in a highlight reel. It moves flat, 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 flat. And then, all at once, it breaks upward, sharply, almost violently, like something that had been building pressure underground, finally finding its way to the surface. The problem is, you can't see the pressure building. You can only see the flat line. And the flat line lies to you. It tells you nothing is happening. It tells you to stop. Do not believe it. The flat line is not evidence of failure. It is the quiet, invisible accumulation of everything you've been putting in, waiting for enough weight to finally break through. The only people who never see the breakthrough are the ones who stopped walking during the flat part, convinced that flat meant forever. I want you to think about your body right now as the first battlefield, because the grind isn't only mental. And if you're neglecting your body while trying to build your mind, you are trying to run a machine on an empty tank and wondering why it keeps stalling. Discipline in one area of your life bleeds into every other area, and undiscipline does the exact same thing in reverse. The version of you that hits snooze on the workout, that eats whatever's easiest without a thought, that stays up scrolling instead of sleeping, that version of you is quietly training the same muscle of self-abandonment that shows up later when the business deal gets hard, when the relationship needs an uncomfortable conversation, when the dream needs one more push you don't feel like giving. Every small promise you keep to your body is a deposit in the same account you're going to need to withdraw from later in a completely different arena, when the stakes are higher than a missed workout. Get up, move, sweat, not because it makes you look a certain way, but because it teaches your nervous system on a cellular level that you are the kind of person who does the hard thing even when it's optional, even when nobody's checking. Let's talk about the noise. Because this year, the noise is going to be louder than ever, and you need a strategy for it, not just good intentions. Everyone around you is going to have an opinion about your plans. And here's the uncomfortable statistic. Almost nobody says out loud. Most of that opinion even from people who love you, is going to be shaped by their own fear, their own unlived dreams, their own comfort with keeping you exactly where you currently are. Because your growth, whether they mean it or not, is going to remind them of everything they didn't chase. That doesn't make them villains. It makes them human, the same as you. But it means you cannot outsource your confidence to vote from people who benefit, even subconsciously, from staying small. You have to build an internal compass so steady that external noise becomes just that, noise, whether passing over a mountain that doesn't move because of it. This doesn't mean you stop listening to wisdom. Stop taking feedback. Stop letting people who've actually walked the road ahead of you speak into your process. It means you learn the difference between feedback that sharpens you and doubt that's dressed up as concern, and you get ruthless about which one you let inside. There's a particular kind of loneliness baked into real ambition, and I'm not going to pretend it away, because pretending it away is how people get blindsided by it later and mistake it for a sign. They're doing something wrong. The higher you climb, the smaller the room of people who fully understand what you're carrying. That's not a flaw in your journey. That's the terrain. Very few people around you are going to be swinging at the same target you are, which means very few people are going to fully grasp why you're sacrificing sleep, relationships, comfort, certainty for something that hasn't paid off yet and might not for a long time. You will have to learn to be your own witness in those stretches, your own proof, your own applause, not because no one else ever will clap for you. Eventually, when the work is undeniable, they will, but because if you need that applause to keep moving, you will stop the moment it's not loud enough. And it is almost never loud enough in the beginning. Now let's get specific about strategy, because raw effort without direction is just exhaustion with extra steps. Every serious pursuit needs rhythm, not just intensity. Sprint too hard without recovery, and you'll burn through your reserves before the real test even arrives. This is where so many people get it backward. They mistake constant, frantic motion for progress, filling every hour with activity because stillness feels like falling behind. But some of the most important work you'll do this year is going to happen in the quiet, in the recovery, in the deliberate pause, where you step back, assess what's actually working versus what just feels productive, and adjust before you burn another month sprinting in the wrong direction. Busy is not the same as effective. Motion is not the same as progress. Learn to ask regularly, brutally, honestly, is this actually moving me toward the thing I said I wanted? Or is this just activity that makes me feel like I'm doing something while I quietly avoid the harder, scarier task that would actually move the needle? And here's the part of strategy almost nobody wants to hear, because it requires admitting something uncomfortable. Sometimes the plan you've been so attached to is wrong, and clinging to it out of stubbornness disguised as commitment is going to cost you more than admitting you need to pivot ever would. There's a difference between quitting the goal and adjusting the route to the goal, and confusing those two costs of people in years of their lives. You are allowed to change the method. You are allowed to say, this specific approach isn't working, without that meaning I am giving up. In fact, the willingness to kill a plan that isn't working without killing the dream underneath it might be the single most underrated skill of everyone who's ever built something that lasted. Stubbornness about the outcome, good. Stubbornness about the exact method, that's often just ego wearing the costume of commitment. You're going to have to make peace with something else too, something that trips up even the most driven people. The goal you're chasing right now might look completely different by the time you actually reach it, and that's not failure. That's growth doing exactly what growth does. The version of you setting out today does not have the same information, the same wisdom, the same scar tissue as the version of you who's going to arrive at the destination. That future version is going to look back at some of today's certainties and shake his head or her head at how narrow the vision used to be. Let that happen. Don't grip the original blueprint so tightly that you refuse to let the goal evolve as you do. The tightest grip in the world is still just a grip in the past. Growth requires open hands. So, here is where we are. You know the work doesn't stop feelings. You know the flat line is lying to you when it tells you nothing is happening. You know discipline's pain has an expiration date and regrets don't. You know the staircase reveals itself one step at a time. Time and no amount of waiting will make it appear all at once. You know the noise around you is mostly other people's fear of wearing a disguise. And you know real strategy means rhythm, not just relentless motion. All of that is armor. All of that is fuel. But there's one more piece still sitting ahead of us. The piece that ties every single thing we've covered together into something you can actually carry into January and February and the brutal middle stretch of the year, where most people quietly give up without even announcing it to anyone, including themselves. That piece is coming next. And it's the difference between a good year and the year that changes the entire trajectory of your life.